And welcome everybody to the 101st episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I am your host, Callahan, and we've got a really good one lined up for you on this episode. Joining me is fellow Sculpty boy, Cobblepot. Cobble, how you doing?
Doing well. Good to be here.
It's great to have you back. I'm really excited to talk Lord of the Rings, Tales of Middle-earth. I imagine, like, of all the people in the Mind Sculptors that I could have had on for this podcast, like, honestly, yes, exactly. For our audio listeners, Cobble just stood up and showed his Tolkien tattoo. So Cobble was, like, the perfect person to have on for this set review. Also joining us again, Tyler from Play to Win. He's back. How's it going, Tyler?
Hi, it's going great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm super stoked for this set.
This set's super cool. Let's get into this today. Last week, we kind of talked about nothing for like 45 minutes. This week, we're going to get right into it because we've got a fair number of like pretty interesting cards to talk about. And first, we're going to talk about a couple of the potential commanders from this set. One of them, of course, is Aragorn the Uniter. It's not Unifier. Aragorn the Uniter. Excuse me. It costs red, green, white, and blue. It's a human noble. That is a 5/5 that says, whenever you cast a white spell, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever you cast a blue spell, scry 2. Whenever you cast a red spell, Aragorn the Uniter deals 3 damage to target opponent. And whenever you cast a green spell, target creature gets +4/+4 until end of turn. So, Tyler, it does deal infinite damage with a squee and a food chain.
That it does.
That is a thing that it can do. But overall, what are your kind of impressions of this card, generally speaking, as a cEDH command?
Well, I would say since you started with food chain, I think it's pretty safe to say that this is at this point the second best 4-color single card commander for food chain after Atraxa, which is pretty narrow and not the greatest. I think
Omnath is better.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about
Omnath. Probably better.
Yeah, might be. Okay, so maybe third best then. I'm delighted that we have another card in these colors, so I'm gonna just call this Aragorn of Meletus for my own sanity's sake. But yeah, it's the kind of card that just generates like low level value over and over by doing what you want to do anyway, which is cast spells. You pretty much don't ever care about triggering anything other than the token generating and scrying 2 in terms of incidental value, and the red as the outlet. So it's got the ability to be that commander. I don't think that doing 4-color food chain in these colors is necessarily better than a lot of other food chain decks. But I guess it's nice that there's an LOTR option for food chain.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's got much more going for it than that.
Every time I look at this card, I can see, like, in my mind's eye, people from WotC wringing their hands, looking at Kenrith and being like, okay, how could we do something that's not so overtly problematic, but still has interesting things? And I mean, if you squint, it's got a lot in let's say thematic similarity. I mean, really, I don't like very much that is actually written on the card, because okay, I don't really want to be giving creatures +4/+4. I would very, very much rather have a 1 damage that can hit any target rather than 3 damage that only hits an opponent.
Mm-hmm.
And scrying but not drawing, I get why they needed to do that, but still, you can't actually gain advantage. And creating 1/1s, we have more economical ways to make 1/1s more efficiently. So it's like, maybe if you're looking to do an interesting Jeskai Ascendancy deck or something like that, and you want to put something clever together with Earthcraft or whatever, maybe you could get something rolling. But no, I don't really see this doing anything in the upper echelons. I definitely see it as super fun for the more casual side, but
yeah.
So Cobble, since you started with a Kenrith comparison, can I invite you to say Aragorn is to Kenrith as Shadowfax is to Winota? Are we allowed to just call that out right off the bat?
I'll say yes, but I'm trying to think of which one is the paler.
Right.
Because this is very, very much worse than Kenrith, and Shadowfax is very, very much worse than Winota.
Yeah. Moving on to another member of the Fellowship, it is Gandalf the White, a legendary avatar wizard that costs 3 colorless and 2 white. Is a 4/5 with flash that says you may cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had flash. If a legendary permanent or an artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So Cobblepot, it was kind of interesting because when I saw this get spoiled, I initially thought, I was like, oh, this is a really good card in the 99. And then I saw people comparing it to Teshar. What are your thoughts on this as a commander? I know we've talked about it as potentially very good in the 99, but what are your thoughts on this as a commander?
As a commander, I'm a little bit less excited about it. I feel like in any stacks deck, a primary angle of attack that you're going to be looking for is rule of law when you have white. And you're always looking for ways that you can break parity on your rule of law effects. And that is going to include things like flash, so that you can make use of other people's turns to get around that limitation, but also making more use of non-cast abilities, things like enter the battlefield abilities, activated abilities, and that sort of thing. And this is doing both of that. It's doubling up the enter the battlefield triggers for things that you do care about, and it's giving you the ability to sneak in kind of whatever effect you need to in a reactive way. So, for instance, if somebody is going to play their Underworld Breach and nobody has, a Rest in Peace or a Grafdiggers or anything like that, they might go ahead and start off, and then you can flash in a Grafdigger's Cage, and that is
but not a Rest
line,
in Peace.
but not a Rest in Peace. No. But it's not something that people will be expecting because it's not typical of that particular archetype most of the time. Most of the time, people look at a rule of law archetype and they're expecting that you're going to do stuff on your turn and not be particularly reactive. You're going to be more proactive. So this allows people to be more reactive in that archetype, which will have some ahas, like, I got you because you weren't expecting that. But it promotes a more interactive approach to that style of play. And whether that makes it worthwhile to have we've got a couple of mono white players that are in our echelons that probably could speak to that a little bit more. I plan to use Gandalf more in the 99, like we said, but as a commander, there's some interesting stuff there.
Tyler, when you look at this card, what are your thoughts on Gandalf and where it stands in the metagame?
I think it's unplayable as a commander and mediocre in the 99.
Okay.
My issue with it as a commander in particular is, like, I totally agree with Cobblepot's of assessment of, like, turning mono white stacks into a more interactive deck is a really, like, interesting thing that maybe has the potential for some gotchas. But my problem with it is that you can't just not play all the really good stacks pieces that would come down on your turn that you're not interested in playing with Flash. So then I think almost the best case scenario, weirdly, is that you're staring down the decision point constantly, where you either play something on your turn or hold up to play something interactive that might have a gotcha moment, but then you're letting, at least one, if not more, opponents get away through their turn without the stacks that you would have played in your main. So I feel like it's kind of telling you to do competing things. Maybe there's a way to thread that needle really effectively, but I would be surprised if I see a lot of this.
That is the two specific commanders that we were taking a look at. Like I said, not a lot as far as commanders go for this set.
I have a lore question. Can I ask a lore question of Cobble, our resident J.R.R. Tolkien expert? Callahan referred to this as one of the members of the Fellowship. Is Gandalf the White still a member of the Fellowship, having been exiled from the battlefield as Gandalf the Grey and returned? Or is it a separate instance of the same permanent and therefore not a member?
So he didn't become Gandalf the White until the Fellowship had already been broken. So Gandalf the Grey would have been a member of the Fellowship, and Gandalf the White, while still acquainted and close to the members of the Fellowship, never would have been a member proper.
See, I see it more as a it's an immutable thing that was in the commander ability is an immutable thing. So once you're in the Fellowship, you're in the Fellowship.
Stick around for more semantics like this, and Cobble shaking his head in despair. It's going to be great.
So let's take a look at some of the cards in the 99, and what better place to start than with the lands. So we've got a 1-color legendary land cycle, and they are specifically very prominent places throughout Middle Earth. So for black, we have I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly, but it's Barad-dûr.
Yeah.
I think that's how you're supposed to say it. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control legendary creatures, which all 5 of these do. Makes black mana and then has XX black tap, and you amass Orcs X. And that is one of the abilities of the Morgul armies, is to make instead of amass zombies, you are amassing orcs. So that is what the black one does. The white one is Minas Tirith, which as well enters tapped unless you control a legendary creature. Makes white mana and is a colorless and a white to tap to draw a card, and you can only activate if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. The red one is the Mines of Moria, which has the second activated ability is a 3 colorless and a red to activate. Exile 3 cards from your graveyard, create 2 treasure tokens. The blue legendary land is Rivendell, and it has the ability for a colorless and a blue, you tap it, scry 2. And you can only activate if you control a legendary creature. And then finally, we have the Shire for green, which lets you tap a colorless and a green and this land to create an untapped, and you tap an untapped creature you control. Wow, that makes it significantly worse. And you create a food token. So, Tyler, we kind of talked about this pre-show, and I kind of just referenced this. The green one is bad. Indisputably bad.
At least the green one is bad.
The other
most all of them.
So out of these 5 lands, which one of these scream playable, and in what scenario do they scream playable?
Well, I think the only ability that feels actually worth it is the white one. Draw a card only if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. I would say outside of very specific decks, none of the rest of them feel great, with the notable exception of Mines of Moria being possibly reasonable in Magda, but just because of its reliance on treasures. But I also think that, as I alluded to before the show, the the downside of them entering tapped in the case of everyone except the white one, I think is just enough worse than the ability is good that I just don't think they're likely to see play.
I mean, we don't need to belabor the point. None of these are like,
So-
wow, they're going to change the format.
Yeah, I like
You know what,
Minas
people-
Tirith. So
Go ahead.
You know what makes it hurt worse is that we just had a legendary land cycle that enters untapped that was fabulous. It's just in light of the Kamigawa lands, it feels like a real slap in the face, to be honest. But
well, let's look at some creatures here. The first one here in our list is a card that we were in the car. It was me, Morgan, and Reed in Minneapolis. And Phoenix is at the event where these are being revealed. And he texts us, I can't tell you or show you this card, but it's going to change Commander. And we're like, okay. So eventually it ends up, people, are eventually allowed to post it on Twitter. We see Delighted Halfling while we're at dinner. And I was very close to doing a spit take when I saw this card. So Delighted Halfling is costs 1 green. It's a 1/2 Halfling citizen that has tap for colorless or tap to add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a legendary spell, and that spell can't be countered. So, Tyler, not only, this is something that just occurred to me. Not only does this make your commanders uncounterable, but it also makes other legendary spells you cast uncounterable, which is kind of wild.
Yep.
So, I know you're a Kinnan player, so obviously you're excited about this, right? Like,
oh, certainly. But I think everyone should be excited about this. It might be a tiny bit of a reach to say it's going to change Commander, but not a ton of one. We already have a lot of good one green mana dorks. I don't think anyone's going to rush to say that this is better than Birds of Paradise, but it is very good. So we already had, effectively Boreal Druid the first half of this text, but stapling Caverner Souls for legendaries onto it is a really, really big difference. It's definitely enough of a difference that more or less every deck wants this. We are just up 1 more card on single mana dorks that every single green deck runs. And I think it's kind of that simple. This immediately isn't. This is an Elvish Mystic. In some situations you might be less excited because it doesn't produce colored pips, but most of the time it's probably going to feel just as good as those.
Yeah, I mean it's really good. Cobble, when you see this, can you imagine a world where there is a green deck that wouldn't want to play this?
No.
Yeah, I was trying to.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah. I mean, I was sitting here like going through decks in my head, and I'm like, no, it definitely you definitely play that. No, you definitely still play it there.
I mean,
and so
if you have if you don't have any legendary, so I'm trying to think of a deck that has a commander with green in its color identity where nothing in the 99 is a legendary, so it'll just be a Boreal Druid.
Well, a Boreal Druid that can cast your commander uncounterable.
Right, and protect the casting of your commander.
Yeah.
Which, if you're in I feel like this does a lot for specifically green decks who have creature or commander reliant strategies. And this is a really cool card to see in this. I just got done talking about Atraxa and how good it is. Hey, look, my Atraxa is uncounterable now. Get wrecked. I just see this as being an auto include in every green deck, and I can't imagine a world where it's not.
Much,
but that's kind of what I think on it.
Can I add the one Kinnan note just before we move on?
Yes, absolutely.
For anyone who doesn't already know this, Kinnan does not color. Oh my god, I can't talk. Kinnan does not copy the restriction of mana that you produce. So in Kinnan, this Delighted Halfling can produce one colored pip that doesn't need to be spent on a legendary spell. Just for the record, can be important.
I hate Kinnan so much. I hate that card so much. I just got done editing a thing with Kinnan in it, and it's just, I hate that card so much. It's just always remove the Kinnan, friends. Next card on our list is Lotho Corrupt Shirrif. It is a halfling rogue that costs a white and a black. That is a 2/1 that says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you lose 1 life and create a treasure token. Tyler, thoughts on Lotho Corrupt Shirrif?
Most things that say whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, you do something relevant are good, and I think this is probably one of them. I'm not sure. I haven't super tried to figure out if there's a lot of combo potential here, but you're more or less restricted to once per turn. But even if you're talking once per turn, routinely making treasure tokens is going to feel really good, and the fact that it's not opponents, it's all players, so you can trigger it yourself. It's really good. So I think this is a pretty reasonable 99 include in some decks that want to generate fast mana and plan to double spell most turns.
What was the white enchantment cobble from Strixhaven?
Monologue task?
Yeah, monologue tax.
Tax, yeah.
Yeah. This reminds me of that a little bit, but it's like all of our notes on that card, they took them and put them and made this card. It feels like almost.
Right. So monologue tax only triggers on opponents doing things.
Yep.
This is more like Ledger Shredder, where you can trigger it as well. So if you want to cast two spells on somebody else's turn, you can go ahead and get additional mana value out of it. It's easier to tutor for the vast majority of decks because it's a creature as opposed to an enchantment, which is tricky for non-black and non-white decks to go and get. This is black and white, but if you have access to green, this is going to be very, very much easier to get than Monologue Tax or Smothering Tithe.
Well, and even if you have red,
have either.
Because even if you have red, either recruiter gets this card too.
It's true.
Now, granted, I don't know if you're wanting to recruiter for this, but it definitely feels like a value engine that also can be a Tymna attacker. Like, I don't see a whole lot of downsides with it, right? Like
the life loss, if you're on an ad nauseam strategy, is consequential. That said, the first place that I've tested it out has been in Marneus Calgar, and it's absolute, it's fire in that because it's giving you a treasure and drawing you a card every time anybody casts their second spell. So it works as advertised.
Yeah. I look at it and I'm like, this feels like a thing that I feel like it does what for like Tymna Crom, what they kind of wanted Ledger Shredder to do, if that makes sense. Because it feels like it does that a little, like, because you're not really trying to bin Crom or cards in Tymna Crom, generally speaking, because it's a pretty control-y deck that usually wants to have a lot of card advantage. And so having mana advantage on top of that, I think probably fits into that strategy a little bit better than Ledger Shredder, maybe. But I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Seeing more cards is still card advantage, especially if you're going to be on Underworld Breach or if you're doing Reanimator.
Yeah. I might give this a try in Tivit. I feel like it's definitely good in Tivit because it helps contribute to the treasure strategy. But we'll see where else it pops up. I also feel like it's probably pretty good in Tymna decks as well. But we will see. The next card on our list is a card that is 100% going to change the format. this card is on our this card might get banned list because this has Hull Breacher written all over it. It is Hull Breacher 2 Electric Boogaloo, otherwise known as Orcish Bowmasters. It's a 1/1 that costs a colorless and a black with flash. It's an orc archer. Did I say the name of the card? I don't think I said the name of the card.
Bowmasters. I thought you were talking about Gimli of the Glittering Caves.
No, I'm talking about Orcish Bowmasters. It's got flash, and when it enters the battlefield, and whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, Orcish Bowmaster deals 1 damage to any target, then a mass orcs 1. This Cobble, how many times can they print this effect before they figure out that this is a very bad effect for Commander? Now, I get that this is probably a card they printed for Legacy, but this feels like it's just a shoo-in to get banned in Commander, right?
I don't know. The things that are really good in cEDH aren't always really good in casual, and vice versa. Things that have gotten banned. Hull Breacher. I mean, Hull Breacher was problematic in cEDH. I don't think that it was on the same level as Flash, but it was definitely something that
it was a good thing when that left, right? It definitely was a positive thing for the meta.
I would agree. But it wasn't banned because of cEDH having trouble with it. It was banned because casuals were doing the thing, and it was not fun for them.
And we got to sit through several months of the RC trying to figure out, is Hull Breacher the issue, or is it these wheels that have been around for forever? Right. And, Leovold taught us this question or this answer. Hull Breacher has taught us this answer. Right. I think this has a little bit of the Leovold effect to it, where it's kind of hard.
Mm-hmm. People saw an A+B and they tried it, and then they made the game miserable for everybody because they couldn't finish the game after that. Everybody else would have 0 cards in hand, and you'd be one player would be trying to,
at minimum, not stop your opponents from drawing. And it does also, after you clear the board, at least give you a thing that can progressively get bigger that you can use to end the game. So I do think that is some upside. Tyler, when you look at this, though, how is this not like an auto include in every black deck?
Well, it is. I mean, I think almost certainly it would be close to good enough if it only said flash when it enters the battlefield. It deals 1 damage to any target, then a max orcs 1. That is already close. I'm concerned that the comparison to Hull Breacher and Leovold is not entirely apt, just because it doesn't actually stop opponents from drawing cards, which makes it less bannable. Which
it does stop them from playing creatures, because it does really make keeping creatures on the board difficult.
It massively disincentivizes creatures, and I am worried about that. I think Wizards has been pushing in the direction of making creatures better, and something that just answers specific creatures not asymmetrically for 2 mana at instant speed seems pretty rough. I don't really understand why they would print this if they weren't prepared to reprint Fire Confluence or something like that. But it feels like we're in the same territory, but it's a much better card than that.
I mean, it really feels like they were throwing Legacy players a bone, and they're like, here's something to deal with Brainstorm. Have fun, Delver decks. We know you're just going to add this to your repertoire, but...
I guess. But I mean, I hope the RC is fast on this then, if that's the case, because it sure is going to make a lot of creature decks miserable. and I'm not very excited about a meta in which creature decks get so much worse that we're much more on fast Nausea and spell slinging decks having enough of an advantage that creature decks can't compete, and those are the only viable styles of deck. I think that's really unhealthy for the meta.
Right. This is one of those cases where counterplay is more challenging than in previous iterations. So somebody with a time twister wants to wheel everybody's hands away, and somebody else has a Narset or has a Notion Thief or whatever. This not only provides the kind of the stick for this is an incoming threat for a wheel, but it also makes it such that you can shoot down the Narset or take out the Notion Thief very easily. So it's difficult to have a proactive anti weapon against that wheel, short of having counters in hand or having your own Orcish Bowmasters. Like the only thing better than a bad guy with an Orcish Bowmasters is a good guy with an Orcish Bowmasters, or something like that. Shoot them first because you'll get because of AppNap.
The fact that it ETBs and punishes the draw, I think, is what's wild.
Yeah, I think that does a lot. The punish the draw is the problematic part, right? Of course, like if it weren't for that, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Coupled to your point, I think it's going to be interesting when we have two of these on the battlefield, because things may resolve in app order, but all the targets have to be declared before then. So I assume that every single time a wheel resolves with two of these on the field, the wheel the effects all end up resolving, and there are then 0 Bowmasters on the field. Like
there'll be 0 creatures on the field. It'll just always be a board wipe, and all the Adnos players at 5 life, and that's not really a problem for casual, because casual likes to have board wipes as long as they're symmetric.
But this is not symmetric.
Yeah,
it's not. And also in both of these cases, there's going to be if there's 2 on the battlefield, you'll have 2 large orc armies on the battlefield after everything resolves, which is going to be problematic for
not great.
People who
especially when you're when you're basically not able to play any creature under a certain toughness. Like, I think like Tivit is going to be fine, right? Because Tivit with Ward 3 and just being a 6/6 is just kind of like, hey, pay Ward 3 for every single target. Go for it.
Right.
But it's every other creature-centric. Like, I talked about how Delighted Halfling incentivizes playing these more commander-centric decks. Or in the same set, we have a card that disincentivizes it. So I'm not going to be like, I'm not actively like rooting or like campaigning for it to get banned. I am just predicting. I think this is going to end up being a Hull Breacher again at the end of the day. Ultimately, I think it's a very different card, but it's a similar enough play pattern, and I feel like it's going to have a negative effect in a different but yet somewhat similar way as Hull Breacher. So yeah, I think a world where creatures can't be played is not a great world.
What do we think this card would have to cost for it to feel okay? Because 2 is not the answer, clearly.
I mean, I would still play it at 4.
I think at 4 it is still borderline bannable. I would want to see this effect at 5 or more for me to even like consider this as like a reasonable card to print.
That's what I'm saying. It's like when I look at this card, I'm like, they had to have been thinking about like very specifically legacy, because that's it punishes brainstorm pretty heavily. So it feels like that, but who knows? It's watch out for this card. I would recommend probably not spending whatever the retail price on this card is right now, because I feel my gut is telling me that we're going to see it run the same course as Hull Breacher.
I'm not convinced of that. It may very well be the case, but
yeah, I'm not
21
convinced
damage,
either, but
21 direct damage in cEDH is generally a board wipe. 21 direct damage in casual is very often not. Just because it moves slower and you got chonkier creatures running around. And I don't know, because the thing that is going to dictate the ban is the impact on casual. And
100%.
I will have to see what happens. If there's no big outcry from the casual community, then we'll have to live with it. And it'll be commanderless commander, basically, because all commanders, except for commanders with ward or hexproof or whatever, are going to be very difficult to keep on the battlefield.
Tivit's like, fuck you, leave me alone, I'm fine.
I'm just hopeful that this is one of those cards that Sheldon has a personal bad experience with early enough that he just goes, nope. Here's hoping.
It's not that easy.
It is not that easy, but
not exactly.
It is a fun joke at the very least that he also makes. So, next card on our list is Samwise Gamgee. It costs a green and a white. Is a legendary halfling peasant that is a 2/2, and it says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. So, and it also has a second activated ability. That is sacrifice 3 foods, return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. Cobble, you specifically asked for this card on this list because it is part of a combo that I've heard gets pretty simplified because of this card.
Right. It's a new, it allows a new Hulk pile that is a single stage Hulk pile that has Grand Abolisher in it. To my knowledge, all of the existing Hulk piles either have to have 2 stages to have a Grand Abolisher, or are single stage but don't have built-in protection. So in this particular case, you've got Grand Abolisher, Samwise Gamgee, Carrion Feeder, and Cauldron Familiar. And basically, the Cauldron Familiar, every time you sacrifice a food while it's in your graveyard, it'll come right back to the battlefield. And then it triggers Samwise to create another food, and it loops and kills the table very quickly. So what that does is, if you don't have a 2-stage pile, the number of cards that are devoted to your Hulk apparatus is decreased, and that means that the overall value of your card quality is going to be improved. And
so what you're telling me is Witch's Oven is going to be a cEDH staple.
Absolutely. You're reading between the lines there. You got me. There's some other kind of cute things that you can do with the food tokens, because you very quickly create a whole lot of food tokens, but this isn't really going to be something that you're looking for other combos. It's just a extremely compact and well protected Hulk combo. Now, Hulk hasn't been tremendous, but now, in the era of Orcish Bowmasters, having creatures that hang around isn't really something that we want anyway. So having a creature that's there and then gone in a flash.
Very good.
I made a pun there.
Yeah, I was picking up on it and I was trying really hard not to laugh.
So And the fact that you have a single stage with Grand Abolisher right there means that people can't intervene with their Orcish Bowmasters to shoot it down and stop you mid combo. So who knows? Maybe in the shifting sands of how all of this plays out, Hulk may come back into vogue, and Samwise Gamgee will be there as a trusted companion to help the Hulk decks along.
Wild.
What do you think about it, Tyler? What's your kind of take on this?
I have nothing to add to that. I mean, it doesn't really have a role anywhere else, and my brain is much too smooth to conceive of new Hulk piles. So I do not do that kind of work. This is best left to experts like Cobble. So yeah, that's pretty much the whole story with it. You're not playing it for any other reason.
Yeah. Well, the next card on our list is a card I'm personally excited about because I get to compare it to an all-time favorite card of mine, and that's Boromir, Warden of the Tower. And I can already see Cobble just sighing as he knows exactly where this is going. This is a 2 colorless and a white human soldier that is a 3/3 that has vigilance and says, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. It also has a secondary activated ability that says sacrifice Boromir, Warden of the Tower. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn, and the ring tempts you. So, Tyler, one might say, just, that this is like another Lavinia.
One might say that. I mean, I think calling something that costs half again as much mana another Lavinia is pretty generous. I think it's substantially worse than Lavinia, obviously. I think probably in general you would rather just have a 2-mana tax effect like Thalia, or something that also does something else relevant. So to me, this reads as like, fringe or tuning to your meta. If free spells are that much of a problem, maybe you end up running this on top of everything else. But
it's really good in Lavinia, I'll tell you.
I bet. But I'm not sure I see this having a strong place in the 99 of most decks, even stack decks.
Yeah, right. Stacks decks that don't have access to Lavinia, that are Sans Blue stacks, would be interested in this because it is a compelling effect, not just for shutting down counter magic, but also shutting down mana rocks and other things that people can cast for free. And it's asymmetric, just like Lavinia is, so it has that going for it. I don't think anyone really cares. I don't know if anyone's ever going to care about being tempted by the ring, but
next card on our list is Eowyn, Fearless Knight. She is a human knight that is a 3/4 that costs 2 colorless, a red and a white, that has haste and says when Eowyn enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls with greater power. Legendary creatures you control gain protection from each of that creature's colors until end of turn. So specifically, this feels like a card that feels like it could be a really good hit off of Winota, Tyler.
Yeah, I could see that. It is a human that you want to see. It exiles one thing and gives your creatures protection from potentially multiple colors. It doesn't seem especially appealing to hardcast at 4 mana, and I think the question becomes, is this better than other hits in the similar price range in Winota? And kind of the same way I said about Magda, I feel like I don't know the deck well enough to assert that one way or the other. My guess is it might not be good enough to hit one thing and get pro a color when the things that you have entering are already getting indestructible. So the protection is kind of not going as far. It's really only about your creatures, your non-human creatures that initially attacked are where that protection's going. And I think most of the time you would rather just have them getting buffed by something like a Rick than getting temporary protection.
It does. I guess my thought with it is it gives your Winota very specifically having protection from a color can mean it has some removal protection. So Winota not being able to get targeted by like a chain of vapor or something along those lines, I think definitely is a positive. What are your thoughts, Cobble?
I think the other aspect of protection is not being able to be blocked. And that's rather significant. If you're able to exile one problematic blocker, and then also in doing so give everybody else, unblockability against the remainder of one particular player's board state, that can, end someone's game very, very quickly with the Winota combat. So it's something that, like Tyler said, I think would require testing.
You try it, see how it is.
Right, because on its face, that's not bad. Being able to make sure that your team is going to be able to connect if you've got something that is really riding on your creatures dealing combat damage to players, then removing blockers and being able to ignore others is a big part of getting there. And this has that stapled on something that can be blinked, and who knows, maybe people will find a way to exploit that in interesting ways, or people will try it and it'll just not quite be enough to get there.
Yeah. We do have a wonderful new white card that is next, and this is actually probably reasonably playable, and that's Reprieve, which is an instant that costs a colorless and a white that says return target spell to its owner's hand, draw a card. This is... So everybody made
It doesn't draw a card for your opponent.
It doesn't draw a card for your opponent. People immediately compared this to
unsubstantiated
remand, specifically remand. And I do want to point out that technically speaking, this is better than remand because of its ability to, it doesn't counter things. It returns spells to their hand. So it gets around the whole can't be countered thing that a lot of cards have, or, well, a lot of commanders now, especially in green, are going to have stapled onto them. What are your thoughts on this card, Cobblepot? Like, it's a very interesting thing to see move into white.
It's something that is in white. Yeah, this is kind of like Mana Tithe for whatever reason. It's I don't know why white gets stack interaction, but okay, I'll take it. It's card draw, which they said that white was going to get. So thank you.
Yeah.
It is a remand effect. It is a unsubstantiate effect.
Half of an unsubstantiate, which is important to note.
That's true. The fact it's not constrained to spells that your opponents control.
Yep.
So there are, fun, stormy kind of things that you can do with that in order to extend your tendrils. That's what you're playing with white. But I don't know. It's unconstrained in what it can hit. So it doesn't say counter target creature, counter target non-creature, counter target, whatever. It's any spell.
Yeah.
That's flexible interaction, which is good.
What are your thoughts on Reprieve? I know y'all did an episode not too long ago ranking counter spells, and everybody kind of went back and forth on where what's it called? Remand fits into all of that. What are your thoughts on Reprieve?
Yeah. That one, weirdly, we were talking about bounce spells and whether effects like this should be considered bounce spells. But I put Reprieve in a similar spot as unsubstantiate. I like them both, but don't find room for them in my decks. I think is where I would end up landing with this as well. It's in a weird spot for white, where like I think it's probably good enough for most mono white decks, but only if your mono white deck is already interactive enough that like holding up 2 mana is not going to be completely going against your game plan, which often that's not really where mono white is. So this is no Ranger Captain of Eos. Like I think white is still at its best when it's using silence effects as interaction and not holding up 2 mana and passing the turn. But I mean, the more Archivist of Ogmas we get, if we get enough flash creatures, maybe this is just the new color pie for mono white is the other one that operates on the stack.
Yeah, white feels like it's starting to get more stack interaction, which I do like to some extent. And I like that this is I like that it's this type of stack interaction. So it's like sort of counter spelly, but not exactly. Which I just dislike
playing white, and I want it to continue to be terrible for the rest of time.
Well, I like playing white, so. Speaking of more white cards, we've got Dawn of a New Age. It's the first enchantment on our list, and it costs 1 colorless and a white. It says Dawn of a New Age enters the battlefield with a hope counter on it for each creature you control. At the beginning of your end step, remove a hope counter from Dawn of a New Age. If you do, draw a card. Then, if Dawn of a New Age has no hope counters on it, sacrifice it and you gain 4. So, Tyler, when we look at this card, we're, again, seeing more white card draw. What are your thoughts on this?
This isn't one of the best white card draw spells that we've had. I mean, I think things along the lines of like Welcoming Vampire are probably still better because they just don't have an expiration date pre-printed on them. And realistically, when this card draw is going to feel good is relatively early in the game. I think, not that it feels terrible later, but ideally you're getting this down early in the game to be able to have the stuff in your hand to make the game go long, because that's the only kind of deck that is paying for this kind of card draw, is one that has access to no other effective forms of card draw. So probably we're in mono white territory again. And probably it's coming down with like 2 counters on it most of the time. So I think it's, I don't know. I think it's not great. It might let you hang in the end game in games where you otherwise wouldn't be able to grind out and kind of remain relevant as a mono or low color white deck. But that's sort of a long shot. I feel like it's close, but probably doesn't make it for me.
Yeah. Hobble, what are your thoughts on Dawn of a New Age?
I think it's really good in casual. It's a Phyrexian arena for white that costs 2 that token decks will like to have, and it's an extra card guaranteed each turn for some period of time. In cEDH, I don't know if even mono white wants it. Just given that we've got Esper Sentinel and Archivist, and we're getting more and more efficient means of getting some cards to hand. Maybe it sees play, but it's not something that I think is compelling anywhere outside of mono white.
Yeah,
power level on par with Mangara the Diplomat. How about that?
I feel like it's a little bit better than that. But we do have another card on here that is probably reasonably powered and reminds me of a card that is banned in Standard, and that is Spiteful Banditry, which is a red enchantment that costs X red, and it says whenever Spiteful Banditry enters the battlefield, it deals X damage to each creature. And then it also says whenever one or more creatures your opponents control die, you create a treasure token. But this ability triggers only once each turn.
Strong feelings, Cobblepot.
What are your thoughts on this card? It reminds me of a card that you have played a decent bit, and that's Meathook Massacre. It has a very direct comparison to that. In that the first half of it is nigh identical outside of it doesn't give -1. It doesn't do -X. It's just X damage.
I think that it's nice that it is flexible, just like Meathook Massacre is. You can cast it with X = 0 and not feel bad about it because you know that you're still going to get value from it because creatures die, especially when Orcish Bowmasters are ruling the format. But yeah, it's got that only triggers once each turn, but still, I mean, if you get 4 treasure tokens every rotation, I'm okay with that for 2 mana. And it also has the ability to wipe the board because you can pay that 1 red mana to kill all of the Orcish Bowmasters that are on the table.
Yeah.
Now, what decks are going to want kind of a slow plodding, drip of treasure tokens, each rotation?
Who's to say?
Me, I'm to say. Niv Mizzet.
Tyler, you wanted to put this in. You specifically asked for this in this list. What are your thoughts on this card?
I think Niv Mizzet probably runs it, and I think some other decks that are running Anger of the Gods or Brotherhood's End could make a reasonable case for replacing those with this card, which are not many decks. I do think it's a short list, but I think this does not see 0 play.
Yeah. We have one last card left on this list, and it is the only one. It is the One Ring, and it is a legendary artifact that costs 4 colorless mana, and it has indestructible. When the One Ring enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything until your next turn. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each burden counter on the One Ring. And then it has an activated ability where you tap it, put a burden counter on the One Ring, then draw a card for each burden counter on the One Ring, which is okay. So this just kind of exponentially gets better. Tyler, I know that you are there is some talk about this in the Kinnan community. Am I correct?
Yep. We have some folks on our Discord who have brought this up as something that we want to test in Kinnan. But because I am a pedantic asshole, I do have to first say it is not exponentially, it is linearly. It is very specifically linearly. because it is incrementing 1 at a time.
Thank you.
Not an ever increasing. Anyway,
I appreciate you holding my feet.
It's not geometric, and it's
right. But anyway, yeah. So I think this is plausible in Kinnan. I'm not entirely sold on it, but I think the idea being that many Kinnan decks already run a bunch of artifact tutors. This amasses a pretty fair amount of advantage, albeit rather slowly, but is also close to game winning with a Seedborn Muse, because then you're looking at 10 cards in 1 turn cycle. I'm not entirely persuaded yet that is enough of a reason to run a 4 mana draw 1 card on its face that can be removed once it becomes a problem and is not great without Seedborn Muse, but I'm open to that being the case. Certainly it is much worse now that Orcish Bowmasters exist, because maybe drawing cards is about to get a lot more feels bad in creature decks.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of weird that the One Ring would trigger the Bowmasters who serve the ring. Anyway, don't try to read into it. There's a lot of things in this. There's a lot of things in this set where my brain looks at the lore and it's like it's all in how the cards play, because the art is terrific. Like, this is some of the best art I've ever seen. Some of the way the cards act, I'm just like, is that how that would work? Why does the ring have no downsides? It just...
This one does.
Yeah, you lose life. It doesn't feel like a downside because we play cEDH, but
yeah,
in some formats, losing life is considered bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I've always been told that life is a resource. What are your thoughts on this card, Cobble?
I think it's a Derevi card.
Yeah.
If you're in a world where Orcish Bowmasters don't exist. But if you are in a world where you can have creatures on the battlefield and they can attack and connect and deal damage, if all of them are able to untap a permanent, then this becomes, a Bant Nauseam, which
if you have
is
any way
something
to
that it hasn't had
consistently
access to
untap
before.
Man,
Right.
this really makes me miss Paradox.
Yeah, I was going to ask, are there any cEDH decks that run Unwinding Clock? Because then you want it.
Right. Gurza.
Yeah.
The Malira, she's the Gruul version of Urza, because you can just tap a non-token artifact for mana. But it, you definitely have Unwinding Clock, but Clock of Omens, which is actually better in this particular case. I think you have Clock of Omens in Magda as well.
Yeah, I've been seeing this in Magda. Yeah.
Right. So,
it can be
anywhere where you're generating.
So
right.
Yeah.
So, you get the One Ring onto the battlefield, tap a couple of clues or treasures or whatever, and untap it, and retap and untap. And especially if you've got Grinding Station or what's the 3 mana whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, untap it artifact. Battered.
Oh, Battered Golem?
I think it's Battered Golem. In those types of scenarios where you can tap them to untap something else, then it gets out of hand very, very quickly, because they trigger for every artifact that comes into play, whether you control them or not. So, but again, all of that hinges on being able to have creatures on the battlefield. So,
right,
we shall see.
With all that said, Tyler, what are your thoughts on this overall? As a set, what are your feelings on it?
I gotta own something here, which is that I have had contempt for Universes Beyond sets in the past, and as soon as it became a Lord of the Rings set, I had to admit that I was just a complete hypocrite, and I was excited for this. And I hate that is the case, because I still don't like that they are doing Universes Beyond sets, and I am one of the most curmudgeonly people you will find about changes Magic has made in the last 10 years. But the set is exciting. It looks exciting to play. I'm definitely going to open a bunch of it. I'm definitely going to play a bunch of limited. I like that it's bringing some things, but not
really fun.
Yeah, it really does. I love that it's bringing some cards to the table for cEDH, but not a ton. I hope Orcish Bowmasters is banned before I even open up my first pack. I don't know. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Kyle, what are your thoughts on the set overall?
I'm excited about the cards. I'm excited about some of the casual stuff that I can do with it. I'm confused at the model where there's like a full set and like a subset and
then
a
commander
set of commander
with a
right. And so it's like, wait a minute, how do I get this card? Which thing do I buy to? I feel like they could have done that differently. But as far as being reverent to the original subject matter, while taking some liberty, they have done a really, really good job. I remember people who were like, you cannot pass, what? They got it wrong. Where it's like, that's actually that is the text from the book. And
it's also the line from the movie too. It's just not the one people remember.
Right. But the liberal use of my goodness, I'm blanking on the text that's on the bottom of a card that gives you
flavor text. Yeah.
Some of my favorite flavor texts I've ever seen.
Right. All and they're all excerpts from the books, and that's that someone did work. Somebody put a lot of effort in to make sure that they were representing the original work, and they were doing it in a thoughtful and authentic way, and I'm grateful for that.
I absolutely want to second that, because when it feels like Hasbro has pushed Magic to do some cash grabs in the last few years, it is nice that through some combination of people who genuinely cared at Wizards and how extremely and notoriously sticklers the J.R.R. Tolkien like intellectual property group is for doing it right. Like some combination of those two things at least made it work. And
we say that, but then also the Gollum game exists, so you win some, you lose some. But thank you so much for joining us this week, Tyler. It's always a pleasure to have you on. So glad that you were available for this and we got to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
For the weird cross-section of people who watch or listen to our podcast, but do not consume play-to-win content, how can they find you and get more information about you?
You can primarily find us on YouTube, just searching Play to Win or Play to Win MTG. You can also go to playtowinmtg.com, which points to a bunch of our merch stuff. And we are as well semi-active on Twitter and I think on YouTube Shorts now. It's a little hard to keep up.
Yeah, you guys have been doing like TikToks and shorts and stuff like that. It's been very fun because I got to see you be grumpy about an Unfinity card as well.
Oh yeah, I do a lot of that. And you can find our Gate to Win merch if you did not see that this is a thing. We were pleased to do that for Pride this year, so I now have an unreasonable amount of Gate to Win clothing, and I'm not sorry.
Yeah, don't be. It's awesome. I'm glad that it exists. It's very much why I permanently added it to our logo. Like I was just a fan. So, but yeah, thank you so much for being willing to hop on the podcast. I've said this before, but you are one of my favorite Play to Win people. One of my 3 favorite Play to Win members.
Well, thank you. I love you guys today.
Agreed.
I feel bad because it's like I also love Cam and Dylan, but Tyler definitely has a special place in my heart.
By the strictest definition, there are 4 current Play to Win members and like 5 total that have ever been. I don't know. Well, so 3 is not a completely meaningless thing. I will tell Nate that you specifically do not care for him.
Oh. Fuck you.
Well, it was nice to meet you and get to chat with you a little more in depth for once.
Yep, looking forward to next time.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Tyler and I are buddies, so I'm definitely not going to just pester him. Hey, do you want to come on the podcast? Hey, do you want to come on the podcast?
Oh, please.
You better watch out. That's how you become a mind sculptor. With that being said, thank you all for tuning in. This has been another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I'm your host, Callahan, and we'll see you next time.
Tell me what you want from me. Tell me what you wanna hear from me. 내게 말해봐. 아직 아물지도 못한 상처 속에 의미를 찾고 있는 날. Tell me what you want.